For 3 weeks straight, Richard Oberoi hadn't experienced a single peaceful night's sleep. A question gnawed at his mind relentlessly, keeping him awake until dawn. Throughout his remarkable career, he'd made thousands of critical decisions without hesitation. Yet this particular choice felt impossibly heavy, like carrying a mountain on his shoulders. At nearly 60 years old, Richard had built himself into a self-made multi-millionaire. His journey began at the very bottom, working as a common laborer on dusty construction sites, mixing cement and carrying bricks under the scorching sun. But Richard possessed something special, an observant mind and an unbreakable spirit. He studied the construction business from the ground up, learning every detail, every shortcut, every potential pitfall. Gradually, he climbed the ladder. From laborer to contractor. From contractor to builder. Each step required courage, calculated risks, and relentless determination. Now, decades later, his empire stretched across continents, over 170 towers standing tall in cities worldwide, each one bearing the Oberoi Construction Group name. More than 10,000 employees depended on the company he'd built from nothing. Throughout this incredible journey, Richard had faced countless crossroads requiring bold decisions. Should he accept that risky project? Should he expand into international markets? Should he invest millions in new technology? Each time, he'd made his choice and pushed forward without looking back. But this decision was different. This one involved his heart, not just his business acumen. Richard had 3 sons, and he loved each of them deeply. They were talented young men, each with unique strengths and glaring weaknesses. They shared brotherly love, but also competed fiercely, sometimes refusing to listen to one another's perspectives. The time had come to decide which son would eventually lead the family empire. All 3 believed themselves capable. All 3 wanted the position. Richard knew that choosing one would inevitably hurt the other 2. The thought of disappointing any of his children tormented him nightly, keeping sleep at bay. How could he make this choice without tearing his family apart? Then one evening, during a conversation with an old friend, Richard discovered a solution so brilliant it would test his sons in ways they never imagined. What was this mysterious challenge, and which son would prove worthy? Desperate for guidance, Richard picked up his phone one restless night and dialed a number he'd called countless times over the years. On the other end was his trusted mentor, a man who'd offered wisdom during Richard's toughest moments, helping him navigate the treacherous waters of business and life. For 30 minutes, they talked. Richard poured out his concerns, explaining the impossible position he found himself in. His mentor listened patiently, asking thoughtful questions, until finally, a knowing chuckle came through the speaker. "Richard," the voice said warmly, "do you remember the less more less principle we discussed years ago?" Richard's eyes lit up with recognition. "Of course. That principle helped me build everything I have. I should have written a book about it myself." Both men laughed, the tension momentarily broken. Then it hit him, a flash of inspiration so perfect that Richard knew immediately what he had to do. He thanked his friend profusely and ended the call, his mind already racing with plans. The next morning, Richard summoned all 3 of his sons to his office. First, there was Aaron, the eldest, built like an oak tree with broad shoulders and powerful arms. Aaron possessed natural leadership qualities and incredible physical strength. He practically lived at the gym and took pride in his work ethic, often arriving at the office first and leaving last. His dedication was admirable, but Aaron had a blind spot. He believed every problem could be solved through sheer force and effort, never considering that there might be smarter approaches. Then came Victor, Aaron's complete opposite. Victor despised unnecessary effort. "Why work like a donkey when God gave us brains?" he'd often say with a smirk. He specialized in optimization, always searching for shortcuts and efficiency improvements. His team knew to expect unconventional solutions. But Victor's weakness mirrored his strength. He sometimes spent so much time optimizing that he never actually completed tasks, always searching for an easier path that might not exist. Finally, there was Ryan, the youngest. Quiet and thoughtful, Ryan was a voracious reader who observed everything carefully. He admired both his older brothers and learned from watching them. His observational skills were exceptional, though others sometimes mistook his contemplative nature for laziness. Richard looked at his 3 sons and announced a competition unlike anything they'd ever faced, a race that would reveal their true capabilities. But what kind of challenge could fairly test such different men? "Gentlemen," Richard began, his voice firm but affectionate, "the time has come to determine who will lead Oberoi Construction Group after I step down. I want the most capable person in that position, regardless of birth order or my personal feelings." The brothers exchanged glances, each trying to read the other's reactions. "Therefore," Richard continued, "I've designed a competition, a race, if you will. I've structured it carefully so that the most capable leader will emerge victorious. That person will become the next chairman. After some discussion, all three brothers agreed. It seemed fair, objective, and final. Several days later, Richard drove his sons to an old construction yard on the outskirts of the city. The site was a vast, open area of uneven ground, dirt mixed with patches of gravel, small hills and valleys created by years of construction activity. In the center of the yard sat three massive square stones, each weighing approximately 400 to 500 kilograms. These weren't ordinary rocks, they were soapstone blocks, dense and incredibly heavy. Richard gestured toward a white line painted on the ground roughly 800 to 1,000 meters away. "Here are the rules," he announced. "You must move your stone from this starting point to beyond that white line using primarily your hands. The first person whose stone crosses that line wins." He outlined the specific regulations. You may use small hand tools if needed, but no forklifts or heavy machinery. You must personally push or move the stone, that's mandatory. You may ask others to fetch tools or provide minor assistance, but the primary work must be yours alone. The brothers studied their stones, the distant finish line, and each other. The challenge seemed straightforward enough, though the distance and weight made it formidable. "Any questions?" Richard asked. Aaron cracked his knuckles confidently. Victor's eyes narrowed as he analyzed the situation. Ryan walked the entire route slowly, examining the terrain with careful attention. "Then let the race begin," Richard declared. What happened next revealed everything Richard needed to know about his sons, and taught all three of them a lesson they'd never forget. Aaron immediately charged forward with his signature approach, but would raw strength be enough? Victor had a clever plan, but was he being too clever? And Ryan seemed to be wasting precious time, or was he? As expected, Aaron attacked the challenge with pure brute force. He positioned himself behind his massive stone and pushed with everything he had. His muscular frame strained against the weight, veins bulging in his neck and arms. The stone resisted stubbornly, it was extraordinarily heavy, and the soft dirt beneath made movement even harder. But inch by painful inch, Aaron's stone began to move. Sweat poured down his face, but he smiled with satisfaction. This was exactly his kind of challenge, straightforward, demanding, requiring nothing but determination and strength. He was certain he'd win through sheer persistence. Meanwhile, Victor watched Aaron struggle and shook his head. "There's no way I'm going to kill myself like that," he muttered. His mind raced through possibilities. He wasn't as physically strong as Aaron, and prolonged hard labor simply wasn't his style. There had to be a smarter method. Then inspiration struck. Victor called for tools, a hammer, chisel, and other implements. Once they arrived, he began systematically chipping away at his stone's corners and edges. His plan was elegant, reshape the square block into something more manageable. Aaron noticed Victor's strategy and dismissed it with a grunt. Typical, he thought. Always looking for shortcuts instead of just doing the work. He returned his focus to pushing, convinced that his straightforward approach would triumph. Victor ignored his brother's disdain and continued his methodical work. After 30 minutes of patient chiseling, he'd transformed his square stone into something approaching a sphere, a round ball that could roll rather than slide. As both older brothers pursued their strategies intensely, Ryan stood at his stone doing nothing. Or so it appeared. In reality, Ryan was thinking deeply. He walked the entire route again, studying every detail, the terrain slopes and dips, the dirt's composition, the most efficient path. He spent 15 to 20 minutes in this quiet observation while his brothers worked frantically. Those watching from the sidelines whispered among themselves. "Ryan's going to lose badly," they predicted. "He hasn't even started yet." But after his thorough analysis, Ryan finally picked up tools and began reshaping his stone, similar to Victor's approach. Observers assumed he was simply copying his brother's idea, lacking originality. However, Ryan's strategy was far more sophisticated than anyone realized. While Aaron's muscles screamed in agony and Victor's clever optimization faced an unexpected obstacle, Ryan was about to demonstrate something revolutionary. What had he seen that his brothers missed? After working for another 30 minutes, Victor had successfully transformed his stone into a nearly perfect sphere. When he gave it the first push, something remarkable happened, the stone rolled. It still required significant effort, but compared to Aaron's grinding push-slide method, Victor's stone moved with relative ease. Spectators murmured in admiration. His optimization was paying off. Aaron, meanwhile, had covered about 30 to 40 meters, but at a terrible cost. His hands were raw, his arms trembled with exhaustion, and his initial confidence had evaporated. Worse still, as his square stone pushed forward, it created a growing mound of dirt in front of it, a barrier that made each subsequent push harder than the last. Aaron's approach became a repetitive cycle, push the stone forward, walk around to clear the accumulated dirt, return to push again, then clear more dirt. It was brutally inefficient, but he refused to change strategies. Hard work always wins, he told himself through gritted teeth. His determination impressed everyone watching. There was something admirable about his refusal to quit despite the obvious struggle. But then Victor began rolling his spherical stone forward, and the race dynamics shifted dramatically. While his strategy required effort at the start, maintaining the rolling momentum was considerably easier than Aaron's method. Victor gained ground quickly, his optimized approach clearly superior to brute force alone. As this competition intensified between the two older brothers, Ryan was still at the starting line, working on something entirely different. Yes, he'd reshaped his stone, but not into a sphere like Victor's. Ryan had created a cylindrical shape, almost like a barrel lying on its side. More strangely, instead of immediately pushing his stone forward, Ryan spent time modifying the route itself. He walked back and forth with a shovel and other tools, digging here, flattening there, removing rocks and debris. He appeared to be smoothing and leveling the entire path his stone would travel. Spectators shook their heads in disbelief. "What is that boy doing?" they whispered. "He's guaranteed to lose now. He's wasting time playing in the dirt while his brothers are halfway to the finish." Even Richard watched Ryan's unusual behavior with curiosity. Was his youngest son overthinking the challenge? Had his love of books made him too theoretical, disconnected from practical action? But Ryan knew something his brothers didn't understand, a principle that would turn this race completely upside down. As Aaron's body began failing him and Victor encountered an unexpected problem, Ryan was about to shock everyone watching. The real competition seemed to be unfolding between Aaron and Victor. Aaron's pure determination had carried him forward steadily, but his pace was slowing dramatically. Every push took more out of him. His hands were bleeding, his breathing ragged. Still, he refused to quit, grinding forward, meter by agonizing meter. Victor, with his clever optimization, had taken the lead. His spherical stone rolled with reasonable ease, and he'd covered more distance with less suffering. He allowed himself a confident smile. The smarter, not harder approach was winning, just as he'd always preached. But then Victor encountered his first serious obstacle, a slight uphill section of terrain. The sphere that had rolled so beautifully on level ground suddenly became difficult to push upward. Victor strained and struggled, his earlier confidence wavering. The stone required constant, exhausting effort to prevent it from rolling backward. "This is harder than I thought," Victor admitted quietly, realizing his optimization wasn't complete. He'd transformed the stone but ignored the path it traveled. Meanwhile, Ryan had finally begun moving. He gave his cylindrical stone one strong initial push, and something extraordinary happened. The stone rolled smoothly forward along the carefully prepared path he'd created. Where his brothers fought against gravity and terrain, Ryan had engineered his route to work with him. He'd identified a subtle downward slope that his brothers had ignored. By smoothing the path and removing obstacles, he'd created a channel where his stone could roll with minimal resistance. After that first powerful push, Ryan needed only occasional gentle nudges to maintain momentum. The stone almost seemed to move by itself, gaining speed as it rolled down the optimized pathway. Ryan walked calmly alongside it, occasionally correcting its direction with small touches, conserving his energy while his stone advanced steadily. The crowd fell silent, watching in amazement. Aaron, still grinding forward with bloody hands, glanced over and couldn't believe his eyes. Victor, struggling uphill with his sphere, stopped to stare in shock. How was Ryan moving so effortlessly? Within an astonishing short time, Ryan's stone overtook both of his brothers. The cylindrical shape combined with the carefully prepared downward sloping path created a system that multiplied Ryan's initial effort. What had seemed like wasted time preparing the route now revealed itself as brilliant strategy. As Ryan's stone rolled past Victor and then Aaron, both older brothers realized they'd been completely outplayed. But the race wasn't over yet, and the lessons they were about to learn would change their understanding of success forever. Ryan's stone crossed the white finish line first, decisively, undeniably. He stood there calmly, barely breathing hard, while his brothers were still struggling meters behind, exhausted and defeated. Aaron eventually dragged his stone across the line through pure stubborn willpower, his body completely spent. Victor managed to roll his sphere across soon after, exhausted from fighting the terrain. Both collapsed near the finish line, chest heaving, while Ryan looked as fresh as when he'd started. The silence was deafening. Everyone who'd been watching stood in shock. They'd witnessed something unexpected, something that challenged their assumptions about hard work, intelligence, and success. Richard walked to the center of the finish area, his face unreadable. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and switched it to speaker mode. Before I announce my decision, Richard said, I want to introduce you to the man who helped me conceive this entire competition. A warm, familiar voice emerged from the phone speaker. Hello, boys. Congratulations to all three of you for completing this difficult challenge. Richard smiled. This is Dr. Burke, my oldest friend and mentor. He's guided me through many of life's toughest decisions. Dr. Burke continued, Aaron, you demonstrated extraordinary determination. You moved a 500-kilogram stone 70 meters through pure strength and willpower. That's genuinely impressive. Aaron managed a weak smile, though confusion showed in his eyes. But I still lost, he said. You lost not because you lacked effort, Richard interjected, but because you weren't effective. You believed that pain equals progress, but that's not always true. Suffering isn't a strategy, it's sometimes just poor planning. He turned to Victor. You were clever, optimizing the stone itself. You transformed it into a sphere, which dramatically reduced the effort needed to move it initially. That showed real intelligence. Victor nodded, but his expression remained troubled. But I still lost, he admitted. Even with my optimization, I struggled at the end. Exactly, Richard said. Because you optimized the wrong thing, or rather, you only optimized half of what needed optimizing. You transformed the stone but ignored the path. You were smart, but not smart enough. Finally, Richard turned to Ryan with an expression of pride mixed with curiosity. What principle had Ryan understood that his brothers missed? The answer would unlock a secret that had driven Richard's entire empire. Ryan, Richard said, at first, I thought you'd lose spectacularly. You seemed to waste precious time while your brothers raced ahead. But you understood something profound that they didn't. Dr. Burke's voice came through the speaker again. You see, boys, your father didn't build his empire through hard work alone, nor through cleverness alone. He succeeded because he understood what I call the less more less principle. In academic terms, it's known as the 80-20 principle, or Pareto principle. Ryan's eyes lit up with recognition. He'd read about this concept. Aaron looked confused. Victor knew of it vaguely but had never truly grasped its power. Dr. Burke continued, the principle states that roughly 80% of results come from just 20% of efforts. Conversely, 80% of your effort often produces only 20% of your results. The key to exceptional success is identifying which efforts belong to which category. He explained further, Aaron, you gave 100% effort, which is admirable. But you distributed that effort incorrectly. You spent enormous energy on the 80% of activities that yield only 20% of results, pushing that stone across difficult terrain using pure force. Aaron's face showed dawning.